So at 47 years old, somebody with a pretty good little resume moved home with his parents. So I'm here to tell you that I got sober. I didn't go to treatment. I moved in with my parents for 14 months. And I want to tell you a little story about my father as a way of illustrating what it's like on the family, and I want to transition to that now. My mother had early onset Alzheimer's at 64 years old. It's the most mysterious disease in the world. And by the time I moved home, my mother could say a few sentences, but she was really approaching the point of where she was not communicating. And so my father was taking care of both of us. And I did what I'd always done, and I went to the freezer and I found his ice cream one night and I ate all of it. And the next morning, my father wakes in with my mother waiting for her coffee at the table, me waiting to be fed my breakfast, my father going to the ice box, opening the freezer, and seeing that his ice cream carton has been returned empty, and he breaks down into tears. And he looks at me and he says, I've got two of the most important people in my life who are dealing with diseases that I do not understand. How can you do this to me? Then I had no answer. I am not somebody who grew up with alcoholic parents. I'm not someone who has had a child yet who is experiencing these kinds of issues. But I got to see it in my father's eyes. I know I can empathize with, in that moment, what it's like to be on the other side. So let's begin to transition on what it is to be able to get folks the help that they need. I can tell you this. I've done a lot of work with people, both families as well as people that are addicts and alcoholics who are working on getting sober. Right now, in my house, in our kitchen, in our sitting area, we probably have 30 men who are having an AA meeting in our house. I've been doing that for 10 years. My story is no different than most of those men. Community is the key. We can bring every professional into the equation that there is, but until, and this is my experience through and through, until someone who is struggling with addiction can find a community that they feel comfortable and safe in and want to grow with, you can't solve the riddle otherwise. I really, really do believe that at my deepest foundation. And what's interesting, I'll go second, is it doesn't have to be contemporaries. This age range that's probably sitting in our kitchen tonight goes from gentlemen that are in their 70s literally to young men that grew up with my daughters. And that's and I want to give you another point, is the degree of love and connection that are in those communities is phenomenal. Other than young men who are family members, I can only name 2 young men that I tell them that I love them every time that I see them, and they're the 2 classmates of my girls who show up at my house on Monday nights. And if you think about the strength of that bond, hopefully you can understand and appreciate the importance of community. And I would suggest that it's equally as important for family members who are going through this process, and that's the reason the CARES program exists, is to find supports and community for them to be in. Because I've also dealt with many families who have called me to try to get guidance on what to do with their kids. And the first recommendation that I have is, I've got friends who are going through the same thing that you are, here's their number. Sometimes I recommend other types of programs, but the number one thing is to find other people who are dealing with the same thing. So that's community. The last few things I'm going to rattle off, and then we'll go wherever you want to, Renee, is another thing from the alcoholic or the addict's perspective, and that what we need to actually be in the dialogue with anyone is we have to dispense with judgment. I would never be able to have gotten where I did if I was still encountering the type of judgment that I experienced, that I was so afraid of. I had to be in a judgment-free environment. I recognize that's difficult, but that is extremely important. You have to have a safe place to heal. And then we can get into some other specifics. So I'll go anywhere you want to go.
So you can see why everyone's a friend of Lynn. Thank you. Thank you, Lynn, for sharing. One thing that stands out to me, how can you do this to me?
Yeah.
And when we have families, it's complicated. You love your child, your parent, you want to do anything for them, and yet the pain that's being caused in here. Tell us a little bit about what you would say to family members that are out there that are saying, I don't have a community, no one really understands what it's like with my son or my daughter or my parent.
In my own personal experience, the people I hurt the most were the people that I loved the most, and there was no way in God's green earth that I was drinking to cause the pain that they experienced. And it's really the hardest thing to get somebody in the room, quite frankly. I mean, when I say in the rooms, I mean in recovery, is just the fear and the shame that are experienced because of all the pain that you know that you've inflicted. And so, again, you know, a reference before, it takes what it takes. And I know as a family member that can be hard to hear because you don't want to have the devastating type circumstances that can occur. But, you know, until somebody's, you know, who's struggling with addiction, it gets to the point where it hurts so badly for them, or they're in such a bind that they have no other choice, or you need to get the support. You know, you've been living with an alcoholic for a long time, and you need to focus on your healing. And that's what she did. And what she also did, which I will forever be grateful for, is that she began to lay the groundwork for when I ultimately had gone as far as I could go and were ready to come in. And so when I walked out of jail that second time, it became apparent that the gig was up and everybody knew. Molly, my ex-wife, called me and she said, your friend Bill, and this is really my friend Bill, a guy that I'd known for a long time, I didn't even know he was in recovery. And she said, Bill wants you to give him a call. He's in long-term recovery. He loves you, and he wants to take you to your first meeting. So my point there is Molly had to quit instructing, had to take care of herself and just lay the groundwork for me, not ever knowing if I would ever step over and in and be available for it. And she found it. And I think this is real important. It's real important to me. Our relationship when we got divorced was extremely acrimonious. To this day, Meredith and I, Molly and her partner, Robbie, get along wonderfully. We have an extended family. What's interesting about it is Robbie, Molly's partner, has 18 years of sobriety. My kids now, for the most part, have been raised in a sober environment, and it's beautiful. My daughter's getting married on May the 3rd. We had a big party. 2/3 of the people who attended don't drink. I never experienced that before in my life. So I just want to tell y'all it does end well, but my gosh, it took her to put the brakes on, take care of herself, lay the groundwork for me whenever that time came.
And Lynn, I want to ask you one more question, but also let everyone know if you have questions or thoughts, please, by all means, we got a microphone. We'll be moving this around. We want this to be an interactive experience. So please think of any questions that you have. Lynn is here to answer that. And Lynn, my last question for you, you say that Molly needed to take care of herself. And for family members, a lot of them have trouble understanding what that even means because their identity is so focused on taking care of their child. No one's ever stopped to tell them you need to take care of yourself. What does that look like for someone who needs that?
So it looks like a couple of things. one is there are a lot of, I mean, first of all, community. I got to keep coming back to community because she needed to go find people that were dealing with the same thing, and she found them. And it involved in basically two categories. One was she knew people who were in sobriety, and that was something she needed to understand. And then she also found a group of people who are also dealing with family members who were struggling with addiction. That's piece number one, is community. Piece number two is she got a lot of professional help. She reached out to organizations who, she ultimately went to work for the Austin Recovery, mind you. I mean, Rachel was on the board at the time. But she reached out to people who were in the industry of working with people who were suffering from addiction. There are a lot of resources, and she also went through a lot of therapy, as did my kids. Went through a lot of therapy, but that was all therapy directed not towards fixing me, but taking care of their own needs and finding a place to put all the anger, the hurt, the shame that were associated with my behavior, but they needed to work on it themselves.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. We have time. So questions, thoughts? And we got a microphone that's going to be running back and forth around.
There's also a QR code if anyone prefers to take your phone out and do it that way, but I'll be coming by with a microphone.
Hey, Lynn, thanks for your comments. Could you talk about, the family member that's dealing with the hijack mind? And I know this is turning it around a little bit, but the challenges faced by somebody who's dealing with another family member who's maybe in addiction. And I know you've helped lots of people since you found sobriety, but what would you tell that family member about how to think about, kind of regulating the stress associated with it, or the lack of understanding, or, just searching for answers on how to deal with someone where the reality is maybe they can't control them?
Yeah, that's great, Russ, and it's at the heart of this whole thing that CARES is about. I do deal with a lot of people who are in active addiction, and although I don't have the same personal tie that a family member does, you get real invested in their well-being. And so the best advice that I can give is to, and that's the reason I use the term, and I use it frequently, is the hijack mind, because you really have to view it as that. And what that allows me to do, and what I strongly recommend, is to find in that level of detachment to where you can be there to try to help them remain safe, but certainly don't enable. I mean, that's something that's real important, because the hijack mind, enabling does not help. I would take advantage of people who enabled me. I mean, it was something that allowed me to keep doing what I was doing. Enabling is something that's really, really difficult, because you want to make sure that somebody is safe. There's a difference between enabling and making sure somebody is safe as best you can, and even that you can ultimately control. But Russ, I think the ultimate answer to your question, though, is not that. It's actually coming to a place, and this is where counseling and support come into play, is having a level of detachment to where you literally disassociate from trying to fix them to just simply trying to guide in a one-on-one dialogue. It has to be a choice of their own. So, for example, talking to somebody relatively recently who is really struggling, and all they want me to talk about, or what they want to talk to me about, is their future and what kind of a job they want and where they want to go. And my response, I don't want to go there, because that's where they want me to go. Where I go is, before we can ever get to that point, we're going to need to deal with how do you get there from A to B, and where are you today in your life that can allow you to be able to achieve those goals? What time did you get up this morning? What time? Now, I understand if you're dealing with your child, it's a little bit different, because then all of a sudden it's pushback and judgment. But I'm trying to illustrate a level of detachment, and it's, how do we get you to where you want to be, and what do you need to get out of the way to be able to get to point A to point B? And if they get upset or they push off, you just have to let them do it, and you just have to be available for the next time. There's a term we use, and it is very important, I think. You cannot get into the results business. All I can do is I can give the advice if it's asked for. I can make you safe. I can try to give you guidance if it's appropriate, but I cannot get hung up on whether or not it's going to be successful or not. And that's the hardest point. So I would say my strongest piece of advice is understand that their mind is hijacked and you can't control their ultimate behavior. You can only support them when they're ready to make a move. If you want to do a follow on that, up on that, Russ, to continue to drive, ask me another question and I'll try to drill down even further.
All right, you offered.
I am.
One of the things you said really struck me about if they gave you the opportunity, you'd take advantage of it, the hijack mind. And maybe you can talk a little bit about how cunning the hijack mind can be in taking advantage when given the opportunity. Because I think a lot of times family members fall into the trap of believing the hijack mind and not realizing how powerful that mind can be and how cunning it can be at telling you whatever you want to hear.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you the discussion that may be going on in my kitchen right now, because I hear it almost weekly. When you actually get a bunch of alcoholics and addicts sitting in a room, looking at recovery, what you start hearing are the confessions of all the money that they've stole from the people that they love the most, what it's like to rifle through not only their own medicine cabinet, but actually sneaking in their neighbors' bathrooms, into their house and into their bathrooms to rifle through their medicine cabinets. It literally is like feeding a beast. When I would get going, I did not want to stop. And I viewed it as fun, as silly as it sounds today. To me, it was all just, give me more, give me more, give me more. I was, and I don't think I'm unusual in this context because I hear people talking about it all the time. I just need to feed the beast, and as long as I'm feeding the beast, then I'm having fun, and I want people to come join me. And if you're a fuddy-duddy and you don't want to be on my program, forget you, I'm off to the races. And I want to do anything I can to feed the beast. So, giving them money, paying their rent, doing things that keep them from having to tend to their own business is feeding the beast. It's not helping them get clean and sober at all. I have a relative that is a young man who I adore, and he is finally having to fend for himself as a college graduate, and he is more on the path to sobriety today than he ever has been. But as long as he was being taken care of, he could eat literally bread and butter as for sustenance, because everything else is being spent on drugs as a way of feeding the beast. So it's all coming from people that he loves more than anything, it's a hijacked mind. I keep repeating it, but that's what allows it to keep going. And so when do addicts and alcoholics hit the wall? It's when they can't go any further. And economics are one thing that can actually make that happen. And sometimes it gets pretty brutal. They may end up, sleeping on couches for a long period of time and sleeping in places that you would hope they would never sleep in. But at the end of the day, I got to keep repeating it, but it takes what it takes. And assisting does not help. Being ready for services can help. That's the other thing that I strongly advise people to do, is to say, the money that I would otherwise give you for rent is standing over here in an account to pay for treatment. You want to go to treatment, the money is there. You want rent, find a way to take care of it for yourself. And in the meantime, I got to repeat, get into the community and take care of yourself, because it takes what it takes for them. And I may be a little obscure there, and I'm happy to drill down on that too. Who else may have a question? I like answering questions more than just pontificating. Yes, Dawn?
Yes, I would like you to expand when you were talking about how addicts will look through judgment.
Yeah. So the thing that I don't want to say it's lost because I think everybody appreciates it, but it's hard to fully articulate how the degree to which you feel you actually are experiencing shame when you're in the middle of addiction. A lot of times you don't I mean, I have to confess, I didn't really fully realize that until I realized I had run the gamut and I had to get sober. But what judgment, anytime I'm going to have to invoke my ex-wife, God bless her. But when she would try to give me instructions, I viewed that as being the critique that just was like fingers on a chalkboard to my shame, because the shame was already there. I didn't need to add to the shame that I already felt. But as soon as I was getting instructions, it was basically illustrating to me that I didn't measure up. Otherwise, I would need to be recommended what to do.
What was she instructing? Like, because I know you said we got to detach,
Right.
but then we've also got to lay our groundwork and then let it go.
That's different. So, and there's a difference. And I'm going to try to articulate it by example. Telling me that I was an alcoholic and that I needed to go to treatment, now that's probably as an initial approach, I wouldn't necessarily object to it, but doing it over and over and over again is not a solution, right? Instead is saying, I believe you have, and I can even say this over and over and over again, you have a drinking problem, issue.
Yes.
Probably after a while, you're going to have some admission that, yeah, I'll probably drink too much, which is typically what happens. It's your issue to solve. I don't want you coming in. You come in the house, you don't sleep in the bed with me. You sleep on the couch, right? You don't come to our kids' games. One of the most impactful things that happened to me was in a basketball game when my daughters turned from the bench and said, Papa, please leave and don't come back to our basketball games again, right? Now, there's a whole story behind that I don't need to go into as to why all that occurred, but nevertheless, that will live with me forever, right? But it was also real important later on. They drew a boundary, right? They drew a boundary. But when it was time for me to realize that the jig was up and then I needed to get sober, that was the very first time. That's the very first image that I had in my mind. That's a boundary. It's not the lecture. It's not the critique.
You're just protecting yourself.
It's me. It's exactly what it is. It goes back to that point. I kind of want to reach out to some of my friends out here like Rachel and say, what else would I need to be saying?
Lynn,
Yeah, well,
talk a little bit. Talk a little bit about. Talk for a minute, if you could, about the person that has the addiction. Okay, there's the problem. That's the person.
right.
The family members that are around them. Talk a little bit about where you begin to see. I mean, I bought into a lot of stuff. Instead of, I mean, you just said something that just totally made my whole night. I should have been drawing a boundary to protect myself, and that was okay.
Yeah.
I can't fix her. Her was my ex-wife. But I can draw a boundary and protect myself. And in doing so, I would have been protecting my daughter.
Correct.
And I did neither. Talk about just a little, whatever, about when you're me, in that example, how do I recognize, okay, wait, whoa, this is wrong. We have a problem.
Let me, not to turn it back to you, but to turn it back to you. Do you, is there any instance in there, in that process, where you're thinking, I'm sure I'm giving a lot here, more than I may have before? I mean, did you ever get to the point in that process where you started really even just acknowledging that that there was more outflow than you were really accustomed to before?
The answer is yes, but for me, for my personal experience, it was a very slow boil. Yeah. I'm a doer, I'm a shaker, I'm a mover, I'm a fixer, I'm going to fix. So it just went on and on and on until the point I got mad. Yeah. And then I was just flat pissed off about it.
Right.
And it just shifted. And if I could have understood what was going on, and somebody would have been talking to me a little bit about that, and I would have known, wait a minute, let me draw a little line right here.
Yeah.
That line might have moved a little bit, but I would have started drawing the line. And again, this is a spousal example, not a parent or a child or whatever.
It's still the same. It's still the same, even with the child, and that's where I go to my relative. It's still the same. I mean, he would call me and ask me to drive him places, and I was like, "You go get a job, you cover your own Uber, but man, I will take you to dinner anytime you want to go to dinner." Right? But back to your point, Waylon, I think this is not going to be a direct answer to your question, but I'm going to tell you why I think that's a problem. Is because what you just described is textbook. But we don't have any information out there about the fact that it's textbook. Period. But I really do believe, having seen it over and over and over again, and the people that I deal with, is there's a point at which we just go, wait a minute, the outflow is much greater than it should be. And it shouldn't get to the point where we get ticked off, right? And so, quite frankly, that's the reason for these kinds of initiatives, is to where you can start getting the word out. And look, I didn't acknowledge this from the very beginning. Those of us who are the addicts and the alcoholics have places we can go. You do have them for the family members, although the community is really pretty small, right? And this is real important to the CARES program, and now what got us all so excited about it is, and I'll give a reference. I mean, Al-Anon. I know people who have been saved by Al-Anon. I actually, my first sponsor was both, and he prefers to go to Al-Anon meetings and he prefers to go to AA meetings. But it's a small community. Al-Anon is. We've got to find a way to get the message out to the family members to be able to say, when you start seeing this behavior and it starts moving in the wrong direction, don't just get to a point where you get upset and all of the lines of, this is the other thing too, is that you also want to leave those lines of communication. You don't want to go so far in the blow up where the lines of communication get broken. That's another piece that's real important that I haven't said, because you may be the last resort. So that's a dilemma. Having worked with a lot of parents, it's like, how do I keep those lines of communication apart without my heart just being ripped open? And that's where the self-care comes in. But to your point, Waylon, most people who go through this have no idea when it's gone too far. And the reason I would say is because we just don't have we don't give the information out, but it's textbook. I don't know of a family who hasn't gone too far, unless they have some high degree of sobriety already, familiarity in advance.
Lynn, if I can ask, when you say a lot of this information exists, it's out there,
Yeah.
but they don't have it, what can our communities be doing more?
Well, I think, okay, so let's use CARES as an example, all right? Because I mean, I think churches are often where people turn for help. And to the extent we can train church members, church staff, what to look for, where to go, have the resources all that are available. I mean, I want to just say, for anybody who needs to go to treatment, and everybody's like, oh my God, I can't afford to go to treatment. We have several different organizations in town that will help fund treatment for people who can't afford it. There's a whole discussion behind that. It used to be greater than it is, but anyway, I think we need to start, in those communities where you already have caregiving communities, and churches make a lot of sense. If we can begin to start doing it there, then you can replicate it in other type of communities where care and concern and community exists. Schools is another one, PTA, but then you get into all sorts of other maybe legal issues, but it needs to be in a community. PSAs I don't think work anymore because not everybody watches TV, watches the same television channels, if at all. But I think it has to be within the communities in which we live.
If I'm sitting here and I'm an addict right now, or I'm watching online and I'm suffering with addiction in whichever form or fashion, what's the one thing that Lynn would say, if you only hear one thing, here's what you need to hear tonight?
As the addict?
As the addict. So say I am the addict.
Right.
Now that you've gone through everything you've gone through, if you could boil it down to one piece of advice or one tip or, sentences, what is it you would say directly to me?
You're not alone. And I will come meet you wherever you need me to come meet you. And the way that I said that's real important. I will come to you to meet you wherever you need me to meet you. Not my prescription, your prescription. I never really had that discussion with anybody. The closest I came, frankly, to having any concern coming at me from that perspective was from my daughters after the 10-point alcohol test they took. That's what they came to me for. Did I push them back? Yes. The last thing I wanted to do was to confront the fact that my kids were concerned about me being an alcoholic. But that's when I ultimately found when I walked into the community that I walked into, all of a sudden I found my tribe. And several of y'all have heard me talk about that, and so it's probably important. This idea of community, my best friends, if you were to, sometimes whenever you do passwords, what's the password of your best friend? I'm still using the name of the guy that I ran around with when I was in junior high school. I haven't seen him in 20 years. I'm going to tell you something. The guys that I sit down in my house with every Monday night are my best friends. They got my back no matter what. They don't care what I've done in my past. They only care about where I'm going in the future. And that's the kind of comfort that an addict or an alcoholic need to have.
All right, thank you. That's a very good answer. Maybe as a follow-up question to that one, part B, if at this point I am completely incapable of reaching out to you, even though we have resources, they could, find you, I can't quite do that yet. What would you want to say, or to someone who can't make that decision yet? What would be maybe the on-ramp to get to that decision? In other words, what would you say to someone, look, if I can give you one piece, do this, or I would say that, because they're the person who just isn't at the point to say, I'm going to reach out, you can come to me. I'm too scared for you to even come to me. I'm too scared to even reach out.
Yeah. Okay, I've got two different answers to that. If I'm literally in a dialogue with them, because I deal with this a lot, my answer is, all I want for you is to wake up in the morning. So would you mind if I call you in the morning? I have that conversation a lot. You get somebody who's really, really strung out, they're on their last leg, all they want to hear is that somebody cares about them, but they don't want to be interceded, and they want to go to bed, and they want to know it's all right, and be available and give them a call in the morning. That's one. Two is if you're talking about resources, if that's what's behind your question, I say go to some place you find is safe. What's safe for you? Go there. Because this idea of one day at a time, which is what we live by, at least in Alcoholics Anonymous and many 12-step programs, is really a remarkable thing. And I don't think it's really focused on enough about what it really is. It's really, forget about the future, forget about the past. Just get to tomorrow. And I'm telling you, when I first got sober, I could not work. In fact, I'm looking over my notes of a talk I gave in 2015. I went a year without a paycheck. I mean, fortunately, I had a place I could land, but I could not work. And so I just had to roll from one day to the next. And it's the same thing for somebody who's in that bind. And they just need to know that you care enough where you're going to check in with them the next morning or go to a place that's safe. And what that means is just go hang out because you got people that are either, you know that you can, if something really were to happen. Because the other thing is, you do hear a lot of folks who it gets so bad, and I hate to bring up this topic, but it's important and it's relevant, that, ending life is the only option. And that's not unusual. We have to acknowledge that. It is not unusual. But it is not typically what they want. They just want to feel safe. And so get them to a safe place. So what does that look like? Church? I'm here to tell you, if or even go sit in a cafe. Just be around people. And I know the other thing too, I do think it's important just to touch on. Alcoholics Anonymous is, irrespective of what people may think about it, it is not a cult. It is just merely a bunch of people that are sitting in a room trying to save each other. It is the best place in the world. And I'm going to tell you something. I may cry on this one. But because I've got this Monday night group, I used to go to a meeting every day, man, and I did it for a long time. But I've got my group, I've got my tribe, we meet on a regular basis, so I don't go to meetings that often. But I decided I was going to go back to my old home group. And this young man came in, and he was so strung out, and he shared, this was 3 years ago, and he shared, he's 5 years ago. And he was just crying because he was like, I just don't want to use again. I don't want to use again. And I'm here, I haven't been to a meeting before. All I want to do is I just don't want to use. And so, he got all his support after his share. And I looked over, and after a couple more, he was gone. So I ran out to see where he was. And I caught him before he got in his car. Because where he was going to go cop. He's going to go by. And I just said, hey, man, let's just sit here and talk for a bit. What's going on? What scares you? You were just in there talking about how you didn't want to use again, and you run out. Where are you going? I know, it's one of those things. It's not getting engaged as his deal in his mania, but I was like, look, I've been at this a long time. You're not going to tell me that you were just going to the bathroom and running to your car, right? I know exactly where you're going to go. Let's just sit down and talk about it. And we did. For the rest of the meeting, we spent it outside. I said, look, you don't know me from Adam, but I care about you getting to tomorrow. Let's meet here tomorrow and go to the same meeting together. And we did. That young man just celebrated 5 years of sobriety and got married last month. That can happen. And I guarantee you, because he sat in my kitchen and he's talked about it, and he was that young man who thought he had no other option than ultimately to kill himself. And now he's got a beautiful bride. He's happy as he can be. He's got a great job and an army of friends that he did not have before. Anyway, I'm preaching.
I want to thank Lynn on that note, and also say that our time doesn't wrap up. We are having space that we're going to still continue to engage. If you have questions, please, by all means. Lynn made a great point and emphasized it, the value of community, of how powerful it can be for someone who's about to take their life, and to know that they're heard, that they are seen, and how powerful that is. And Lynn, for you to be the first of many speakers who share their life story, their expertise, resources here, we're very grateful. Because I know that there's a lot of people, myself included, that really connect with everything that you have shared as a son and as a father. And so thank you for sharing your story. And what's happening here, this is the goal, is that we're building community, people that connect with each other, that talk with each other, that share stories, but also share resources, that share what do we do when it's 11 o'clock at night and we don't know how to help our loved one, our family member, and we're here again. And that's what we're going to grow and learn in. So this is an exciting space. Thank you to each and every one of you, those who are watching or streaming. This is going to happen every Monday. 6:30, our doors open. 7 o'clock, we kick off. And we have someone who's going to share a story. And like we said before, it may be a father, it may be a mother, it may be a sister. And next week, you'll hear from a sister. You'll hear from someone that says, this was my story, this was my experience. So we also want to emphasize, we want to get the word out. We want to have more people in this room and online. So we have cards here. Please share them with someone. If you're on social media, it's got the website in there. Share that. Put that out there. We want people to know that here at Cornerstone Church, something special is happening every Monday night, and you want to be a part of it. So with that said, applause to our speaker. Lynn, thank you. Thank you. And we'll be around here. So thank you all for those who are joining online and streaming. And we really look forward to seeing you and everyone that you can bring here next Monday night. So thank you.